Welcome to
People of Purpose.
People of Purpose.
People of Purpose.
People of Purpose.
People of Purpose is a podcast of inspiring people whose stories help you see things differently, live with intentionality, elevate the way you participate in the world, and take the necessary leaps in your life to seek and find your passions. Come with us and develop the courage to wholeheartedly pursue your purpose and unleash your truest potential. Hello, Leo Bottary. Welcome to People of Purpose podcast. Wonderful to see you here today.
Great to be here, Tanner. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So you do a lot of things related to creating like peer groups and piecing the right people together to create an amazing experience and have a bigger impact. I'm really interested in your work. You were introduced to me through Alexander Keenan with Win Mastermind, who's been a previous guest. And I think that you make a lot of really great points in your work about how important it is to build the right type of organization. I guess I want to start with talking about your book. You tell this story in chapter 6 of Peernovation about a guy named Roy. And you make the difference between what a leader who's part of the team instead of a part of the team. Could you explain kind of that important distinction and how that leads into kind of the work that you're focused on today?
Yeah, and it's the difference between a leader who considers him or herself a part of the team, where we're all in it together, versus apart from it, where all of a sudden I'm on this side of the desk, everyone else is over there, and we're playing the blame game, and it's people feeling like they're playing defense and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Roy was so when I graduated college, I had a job that was starting at the time with Senator Paul Tsongas, but it wasn't starting until October. And when we got out of school in Florida, it was actually like third week of April. So I had quite a bit of time where I figured I had to make some money and I needed a car and everything else. So I took a job at a car dealership and Roy was the sales manager there. And Roy was an absolute just chain smoking tyrant who would walk around that place. If he sensed a hint of inactivity, he would literally take a phone book and throw it at you. Like not just toss it to you. He would throw it at you and basically say, hey, call 15 landscapers and sell somebody a truck. And it was just that kind of command and control, environment. I'm here, you're there. And it was just brutal. And there's some funny stories about Roy in the book that we can leave to that. But I think to your question, it gave me a sense of, of course, years later, you kind of don't connect these dots until later on, as we know, right? It wasn't like right. I came to some epiphany at the moment at, 22 years old that, Roy is really a part from the team, not a part, of it. But in later years, I kind of recognized that leadership style and what that can do and why it can be so difficult to create any kind of culture of accountability that doesn't feel anything like putting people on the defensive, right? Mm-hmm. Any culture of accountability, I think, worth its salt, should empower people. It should help them be successful. It shouldn't be onerous. It should be something that, is by design, brings people together and puts them, on the path to remembering why they're there. And this is why your podcast interested me so much, because this idea of purpose really becomes so central to everything, whether it's psychological safety, whether it's accountability, whether it's productivity, whatever that may mean. Once we remember why we're here and what we're doing, we can kind of give up, the ego and the insecurities and other such things that can come into play. It can become really powerful. But yeah, this idea and basically the way the idea kind of developed and evolved was really through work with a gentleman named Dave Logan. Dave Logan wrote a book called Tribal Leadership. He was the co-author. There was a number of other authors involved with it. And Tribal Leadership is a really terrific book. And one of the things you'll find in that book is that Dave Logan and his co-authors were very excited about triads. The idea of, if in your company, for example, if you're thinking, okay, there's a special project I want to do, don't put 2 people on it, put 3 people on it. two people can tend to kind of agree quickly to a course of action and move forward, where three people might be more considerate about their options.
Right.
It oftentimes solves communication issues. It does a lot of different things. So when we started looking at the power of triads and thinking about it with regard to groups and teams, we saw the leader as one part of the triad, right? We saw an individual member as another part of the triad. And then the third part is the group or team as an entity in and of itself becomes that third
Right.
piece. And all it does is just recognize and acknowledge the fact that every member of that triad has a shared responsibility for the outcome. So whatever that outcome is. So as it's expressed, you've seen the triad, and there's a middle triangle, right? That is, and it's the idea that the three hold up whatever purpose or whatever goal we're looking at. It could be how productive we are. It could be how much fun the team has. It could be anything, but everybody owns a piece of it. And once you recognize that we're kind of all in it together, we're all going to win together, laugh together, cry together, whatever it happens to be, and that we are there for one another. We've found that by far, when you look at the most high performing groups, and I talk about groups in terms of peer advisory groups for CEOs and business leaders, or high performing teams in companies, this idea of the bond that the team members share with one another, including the leader, is most certainly a real distinguishing factor.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. What is it about three specifically and not four or five or six that you think makes it so effective in this tribal leadership model of teams?
Well, I think the odd number certainly prevents ties, right?
Yeah.
So when we have four, we may be 2-2 and we might be locked in on something. Three is oftentimes, it's the other aspect of three is that, let's say if we had a third person in this podcast and you asked me a question and I started answering the question, but the person who is that third person is thinking, Leo, I know what Tanner's trying to ask you and you're answering something completely different. He might halt that conversation right in that moment and say, Leo, what Tanner's really asking you was such and such. I get it. Thank you. And it puts us back on track quickly,
Right.
as opposed to us doing it back and forth, trying to figure out why we're misfiring, on something. So I think that's where, in many respects, the idea of three, can come in as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Awesome. So you're up at 7 a.m. in California doing this interview, talking about these concepts. What is it that feels so purposeful to you about devoting so much of your career to helping these teams get developed?
Yeah, well, 7 o'clock is like the middle of my day. I've been up since before 5, and I love getting up every day to do what I do. And the reason is, and in many respects, it started for me in graduate school when I was a member of a cohort. And for the first time, I'm part of this learning ensemble, right? Where the whole program was designed on one hand. Yes, you learn from the instructors. Yes, you learn from the material, but the real construct of it afforded us the ability to probably learn more from one another than from any other source. And that was by design. And I was really intrigued by that because, as I've mentioned many times, my learning experience prior to that, when I was in college, undergraduate, or high school, was, collaborative learning would have been called cheating, back when you're just, the idea was that, you take the test, you're shielding your paper from everyone else. It was a very much, here's the teacher, I'm learning it, I take it, I regurgitate it back, or I write a paper, or I take a test, or whatever. It wasn't about people coming together and really having deep conversations about what we are learning in a way that it afforded us to understand things more deeply. So when I went through that experience in graduate school, it opened me to understanding when a job became available at Vistage to head up corporate communications there, because that was largely my background, was corporate communications and PR for about 25 years. I thought to myself, wow, I love what they do, which is they assemble and facilitate peer advisory groups for CEOs and business leaders in over 20 countries around the world. But, just the idea of being able to work at a particular organization that I think is quite purposeful and have a role in moving that brand down the field a little bit was really intriguing to me. So I was there for over 6.5 years. And it was actually during that time where it was probably late 2012. I started there in May of 2010. And in late 2012, I led a brand refresh at the company. And so here we are, we're looking at our brand, and I'm interviewing CEOs and business leaders all over. And I would ask them, how do you learn? How do you grow? How do you bring new thinking into your organization? And they would always tell me things like, well, I read books. I have a consultant, a coach. We have, I go to events and conferences. We go to executive development programs at Harvard, Stanford. Nobody was mentioning peer advisory group as even part of their consideration set for how they learn and grow. And I thought to myself, wow, I've seen this work for so many CEOs and business leaders, and yet as a percentage of the total people who could participate in these groups, it's minuscule, right? So I'm thinking, this is an unbelievable resource that people need to know about. So when the brand refresh was done and I was reporting out to the board of directors about the rollout and where we were and what was going on, I said to them, Vistage has been doing this work since 1957, and there's been a lot of organizations that have been in it for quite a long time as well. And all of us are trying to sell a Mercedes to someone who doesn't even know what a car is. So I thought, what if we stepped back and didn't write a hardcover brochure about Vistage and talk about how great we are and what we do and all this other stuff, but to actually look at the entire category. A, would be a great learning experience for us, but B, we could really look at what peer advisory groups around the world were doing and try to talk in terms of how and why these are so effective, and create a book that was kind of non-denominational in that way, right? It wasn't,
Right.
Promoting a particular organization or anything like that. It was just basically saying that if peer advisory groups aren't part of your consideration set for learning and growing, they really should be. And here's why. And that's where the Power of Peers came from in 2016. And I think once that happened, and from there, I've developed a workshop that I've now conducted well over 200 times with peer groups and with some organizational work teams as well. And you see it work, and you see what happens, and you see what a unifying experience it is when you see the difference it makes, not only in people's businesses, but in their lives. That's a pretty exciting thing to get up for every day. So that's what I do.
Right, for sure. As you were doing this brand refresh and leading this brand new venture, how are you utilizing peer groups to help you define what was possible and maximize your effectiveness as you reached out to these folks?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I was at Vistage, I was actually a member of 2 peer advisory groups. One of them was what they call a key executive group that I was a member of for over 5 years. And my group was extremely helpful, in talking about not only what I was doing around the rebranding, but afterwards, and what it would look like in terms of how to take this content and really be an evangelist for it going forward. I was also part of what are referred to as a Vistage Inside group, where there are peer advisory groups, for example, where if you're an employee of a company, you may be a member of an outside group that could include people from within your industry sector, or maybe it includes people, in the case of Vistage and other such organizations like Renaissance Executive Forums or EO or YPO, where the people would be from completely different industries from your own. So it opens you up to a world of all kinds of things that get your head out of your own company and your own business and get you involved, in other areas like that. And so, but a Vistage Inside group, on the other hand, takes place inside your company, where now all of a sudden, let's say in my case, I was a VP there. I was part of a group with other VPs in other cross-functional areas in the company. So you had HR and finance and sales and other such, disciplines represented. And we would come together and we'd talk about how we can collaborate more effectively. What are the kinds of things that we're learning that we can share with others in the room? How do we take, for example, what we may have gotten out of a learning and development day and actually operationalize it, right? So these groups can often serve as a mechanism for actually making things really happen in your organization, as opposed to kind of learning all this great stuff and a month later, nobody's talking about it anymore. So, but I was a member in both those groups, and in both cases, You know, they had their different role, obviously. Some were inside the company and very familiar with what I was doing, some outside the company, and it was different. But both offered incredibly great perspectives that were really helpful in me developing things. So yeah, peer groups are really essential to that.
Yeah, I love that idea that the peer groups help you operationalize. Like when you have this big epiphany or learning experience together, it's often very hard to find out how to integrate that into this machine that's like already still moving as it has been. And when you insert the peer groups, it helps you operationalize that. What do you think that the peer groups do uniquely around establishing a sense of like unified collective purpose in an organization? Do they play a key role in that area?
They do. So first, let's talk about the difference between a group and a team. A group basically is designed for the benefit of the individual members, right? So I join a group because I want to be a better leader, or maybe I want to take things back to my organization or whatever. A team comes together to create a shared work product or to do something that only a team can do together, right? So with that, when you consider the fact that what groups are designed to do, this is why groups inside companies, I think, can be so incredibly effective, is that they help make better individual team contributors, right? So in other words, if I can be part of a group and I can hone my skills and get better and better and better at being a leader or whatever my craft may happen to be, and I can bring that to my team and be a stronger contributor, that's where the group plays a big role. And the group, I think, really is constantly reinforcing the purpose and why we're here and what it's all about. You know, I find it to be kind of another reinforcing element of things when it comes to recognizing, you know, our purpose.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. So what is it about, I was in the research we did, you talked about kind of the power of like kind of enlisting and engaging a complete circle of people who surround us to get what we want in life. Can you kind of talk about kind of on a more macro scale how peer groups really play a role in allowing you to kind of elevate and execute on your sense of purpose?
Yeah. So what you're talking about actually comes from the second book called What Anyone Can Do. And it was kind of interesting because, you know, the Power of Peers was really about formal peer groups and truly peers, right? The second book talked about the fact that, and actually the title, What Anyone Can Do, comes from a quote from Joe Henderson in a book he wrote in 1976 called The Long Run Solution. Joe Henderson is a former editor of Runner's World. And Joe Henderson basically said, if you look at really successful runners or successful people in general, he said, these people aren't like capable of leaping tall buildings in a single bound. It's not like they're superhuman in any way. He said, in most cases, they do the things that anyone can do that most of us never will.
Right.
And so I started exploring not just formal peer groups, but the broader circle of people who surround us, right? The people who we help, right? Or the people who help us, right? Our mentors, our teachers, our mentees, our family members, our friends, our coworkers, this whole circle of the people who surround us and how they influence and shape our behavior. A concept that we came up with in the first book was really, we were trying to suggest that this is much more than peer influence that we know is extremely powerful and very pervasive, right? But the peer advantage is this idea of being more selective, strategic, and structured about the people who surround us, right? And what is that based on? Our purpose, our goals. What do we want to do? How do we want to make a difference in life? And how do we want to surround ourselves with the right people to make that possible? I think part of it is those informal relationships that I talked about, but also you can even take it to the next level and be even more intentional about it by joining a peer group that can help you where you're helping others, right? Which is, you know, part of being purposeful as well, but they can also help you in terms of achieving your purpose in life also. So I think it's a combination of the two. And I think the more we're fixated and fixed on, you know, why we are doing what we're doing, the better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one thing I'm really interested in as part of a bigger vision for what people of purpose can become is to allow everyone to kind of feel fulfilled and really aligned with their sense of individual purpose, and then to combine that with other people who are living aligned to their individual purpose to create a community of sorts where it's kind of this regenerative effect where everyone's getting more elevated in their sense of purpose because the people you're surrounded are part of that circle of purpose as well in your life, and you each have unique roles and contributions to it, and together you can achieve more. It's a really interesting concept that I think you don't really tap into until you kind of have your own organization that you're piecing people together in. I guess my question is like, how is like becoming an entrepreneur and doing these things different than kind of doing these things inside of an organization? Is there any differences for you?
Yes. You have to be more intentional about seeking people's input and advice and help and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not automatically around you. This is not a situation where by design you are working as part of a team. I have to create my own infrastructure, if you will, around all that, both formally and informally. So but I know how valuable it is. I know how important it is. I know what it can mean. And again, not just for me and how I can benefit from, picking up the phone or and talking with an individual or getting a few people on the phone and having an informal peer group conversation about certain things or being part of a formal group, right? I just know what it can mean and how valuable it is. I can't tell you how many thousand times I've seen somebody bring something to a peer group and say, all right, I've got this challenge in front of me and I have choice A and B, and I have to figure out which one to choose. And literally 9 times out of 10, that person finds out that they don't have choice A and B at all. They have choice A, B, C, D, and E that they never even would have come up with in a million years unless they were able to talk through what they're dealing with. And they find out they have far more options they have ever imagined. One of the templates I use actually to tell for case studies for peer groups is literally a peer acronym, right? Where we do a bit of a preface and someone sets up the situation. Here's what was going on. Here's kind of what we were dealing with, right? Then they define what their expectation is of the group. Like, so for example, if they believe they want the group to help them choose between A and B, their expectation is that they will help them do that. Their experience, however, was that once they brought it to the group, they realized they had more options than they ever imagined. And then the R of this acronym becomes the result. So what happened now that you did that? So it's a pretty easy construct that allows for people to, I think, easily understand what we're talking about, what the expectation was, what the experience was with the group, and then the result that was achieved, because of it. And so it shows you and how I think they're unbelievably effective. It's just amazing stuff.
Yeah, for sure. When I was, one of my most recent guests was a president of a chapter of EO. He was like the president of the EO Colorado chapter, and he invited me on a rafting trip with a bunch of EO guys. And it was really cool because there was a group of 6 of them that were in what's called like an EO forum. So it's kind of a small group that does a weekly call. And it goes way beyond whatever business challenge they're focused on. It goes deeply into their personal life, their relationships, their kids, their family, all that. And those guys time and time again told me how important it is to have these people in there that they know are in your corner, that really kind of show you your blind spots. And as you hear about what other people are going through, you get insights into your own situation that you never would have perceived had you been trying to figure it out on your own. It was just such a testament to how important these things are.
Well, and you're defining what we talked about right at the very beginning when we think about that triad model and we think about being a part of the team versus apart from it. The people who participate in that group don't go there having to play defense and explain themselves about why they didn't or didn't do things. It's much more about having a group of people who are there to help you realize what you've already expressed you want for yourself. You just know you have people behind you to help you make that possible. And that's where that comes in. It's kind of the public declaration of, here's what I want to do. Here's where I want to take my life. Here's what I want to do with my company. Here's how I want to make a difference. And know that the construct of that group is such that everybody's there for everyone to help them be successful. And that's the kind of culture of accountability that I've seen in groups, in really high performing groups. And quite frankly, I've seen it work inside companies as well. And when you have companies that can achieve a culture of accountability that looks like that, versus one that is very much about threats and all about just KPIs and playing defense and pleasing the boss, it's not nearly as good.
Yeah. It seems like it takes a lot of humility from the leader or the organizer of these groups. What kind of mindset shifts or exercises are important if you're someone that's like, I definitely need this, but a lot of my personality and leadership style is very much like, more traditional. Like, I'm the boss. These are the things I want done. Here's my expectation. How do you become part of the team when you already have that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think that the leaders that I think are the best leaders are at least ones who are committed to learning and growing. So when you start looking at some of the top leadership scholars in the world, look at Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner in the Leadership Challenge, or read, Good to Great and other books by Jim Collins and people like that, you're going to find a common thread of what that takes, or read the countless books about servant leadership. The idea that as the leader, you are there to serve the team. They're not there to serve you. And when you can wrap your head around that mindset, again, not letting go of personal ego, right? But recognizing the broader purpose, recognizing performance, recognizing the fact that this will work better if I actually allow my team and give them the resources to be successful and them to work, versus me hovering over them and micromanaging and be command and control. If I leverage the assets of the incredible people that I have working in this group or this organization or on this team, you just get an infinitely better result. And I think just as a practical matter, you have to kind of step back for a moment and think about, what do I want to have happen here? And so I think when you do that, that can be really helpful in creating some mindset shifts, right? We don't all have to be like Roy, like we talked about at the beginning. It doesn't have to be. Maybe throwing the telephone book at someone is not going to inspire as much sales as other ways of leading, right? So, and by the way, what's really interesting about that is people tend to, oftentimes in certain situations, in very short-term situations, where someone comes in and just up, and they're telling people what to do, and there's this very command and control structure. It can work for the short term, and sometimes it can even be necessary. Longer term, though, in terms of our relationship with our people and how we lead and what psychological safety needs to look like, what accountability needs to look like, I think we need to think about that very differently.
Yeah, definitely. How do you, as you're hiring and building your team, how do you, what do you kind of look for in the talent pool, in the interview process? How do you identify those like assets about people, and how do you put them together in a strategic way that makes sense for building a peer group within your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we're looking at hiring, in our companies, one of the things that's really important to understand is, what's the difference between the person who makes it in this organization and the person who doesn't? I don't know anyone who's been in business for any length of time, who's had to hire people, who hasn't been in a situation where they had a great resume. The person came and interviewed, they were amazing. Everyone on the team loved them. You hired them. And 3 to 4 months later, if it took that long, you recognize, wow, this is not working at all. And we have got to figure out, and it's bad for us, it's bad for the person, it's bad all the way around, right? And it isn't because they're so bad, it's because they just are not a good fit for how we do things in this company. It's not a good cultural fit in the organization. So to recognize, what does it take to be successful here? One of the stories that I tell frequently is about Gino Auriemma, head coach of the University of Connecticut women's basketball team. I'd say arguably the most successful program in all of college sports right now, men or women.
Right.
When you look at one of the things that they discovered, obviously, in addition to recruiting really talented players who are competitive and have the skills and all that, that's all well and good. But the difference between the kid who gets recruited to Connecticut and the one who doesn't has less to do with how many points a game they can score, and oftentimes more to do with whether that person can be a good teammate or not. And one of the ways they came to assess that is watching a kid play high school basketball when they're recruiting them. And they not only watch what happens when they're on the floor, but inevitably during some point in the game, the kid's going to be put on the bench for a couple minutes just for a breather, and then she'll get back out there. He says there's basically two kinds of kids. There's one kid that'll throw a towel over her head and just try to get rested and be ready to get back out there when the coach is ready to put her back out on the floor. And then there's the other kid who's on the edge of her seat, yelling out encouragement and instructions to the other players and staying involved in the game, even from the sideline. He said the second kid is more rare than you think. But it can be the difference between, so all things being equal, right? If you've got like two really great players and one of them clearly is demonstrating those tendencies and willingness to be committed to being a great teammate to others, that's the kid that's going to be recruited to UConn. And the other kid will be playing for college ball elsewhere and probably do it very successfully, and it'll be great. And again, it's good for everyone involved. I think as companies, we have to pay attention to what is that it factor that makes people successful here? How do we interview for it? How do we assess for it? And by the way, how do we make sure that we have the discipline to say no to someone who on all other counts seems like a really great candidate, but we know in this organization, it's probably best for them or for us that we take a pass. And I think that can be very difficult, especially in today's labor market, where you continue to hear all the time how difficult it is to find people. Yet at the same time, hiring the wrong people can be so detrimental in so many ways.
Right. Or like, it seems like hiring like B and C people that, are not so wrong that it's obvious and not so good that they're having an impact. They just kind of sit around there, and that seems to be a challenging like gray zone to do.
Yeah, you need at the end of the day, you need good players. What is interesting though, and I actually did a webinar yesterday for a company called Quest Corporation of America, and we talked about psychological safety. And, it was really fascinating to get into that topic and see its impact with everything we're talking about today.
Yeah. How does psychological safety, what is that, and how does it play a role in peer groups?
If you think about where it comes from, right? So obviously Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School has done so much to develop this concept of psychological safety. I think it really became a greater, more common part of the business lexicon when Google identified it in its Project Aristotle as essential to high-performing teams. When Google went into that study, they actually believed that having the right people and having the best people was going to be by far the number one factor in a high-performing team. What they learned, however, was that psychological safety was, that the idea of people who can speak up and speak out and willing to learn and grow and make mistakes was by far more important. And if we think about any movie we've seen, any sports situation we've seen or whatever, where somehow the team with the better players loses to the team who just works together more effectively, that's really what we're talking about here. So I think there's no question it's essential to have the very best players. And again, Gino Auriemma will tell you, he laughed one time. He said he was being criticized for the fact that, he said, the only time you ever win championships is when you have really good players. And he says, well, of course. He doesn't apologize for that. Of course you need, people out on the floor to do their job and all that. But getting them to work together as a team is quite another thing. There's a lot of college basketball teams around the country have access to really great players. Whether people consistently can get them to work together in a way that sets a standard of excellence that has transcended the sport, which is basically what he's done with women's college basketball. And it's what, has been happening, over time as well. Right. So, so that's kind of how that rolls.
Yeah, for sure. I've been watching the NBA playoffs this year. Have you been watching any of that at all?
I haven't really, and I wish I could. I'm a Celtics fan, so it's hard for me to get excited about the Milwaukee Bucks and Phoenix Suns. But no, I'm sure it's great for their fans. So it's all
right.
Good.
Well, one thing that the announcers were talking about was Chris Paul and his leadership. Chris Paul's been in the NBA 16 years. This is the first time he's made an NBA Finals, and he's consistently been, one of the top 10, 15 players in the league his whole career. But what's happened recently is he's joined this Phoenix Suns team when they were terrible. They were worst 5-10 teams in the league for years and years and years. And he assembled a group of core people that he held accountable and held to a high standard and became like a part of the team. And now they have this culture where they don't have any superstar players, but everyone's elevated because of the team factor. And now they're probably going to win the NBA Finals. And it's really interesting to kind of see how that can take shape, because a leader says, like, we're all going to do this together. I'm not going to just be out there scoring all the points. It's here's your role, here's my role, here's how we can piece this together. And it seems like the announcers and with ESPN and stuff have such a great respect for Chris Paul, because he gets that as a leader on the floor.
It's a great example of the difference between, you can be a leader of the team kind of in that formal way, but you can also be a leader in your team. And Chris Paul, being a leader in his team, we just saw Tampa Bay was nowhere close basically to winning a Super Bowl until, very recently. And it was one player. And part of the real message of the book Peernovation too is the power of we begins with me. Right. It begins with each of us. It begins in with the recognition of how much I matter, and recognizing and owning the importance and value of the contribution you're making to a team to fulfill whatever purpose you're there for. And so, yes, one person can make a difference. It takes a whole team to get it done, but that one person can elevate everyone else. They always talk about the kind of players, whether you look at a Jordan or you look at Larry Bird or people like that, they made everyone else around them better. It wasn't just that they were good players. They had this ability to elevate everyone else, right? They modeled such incredible practices that it made everyone work harder. When Larry Bird, for example, was the first one to practice and the last one to leave, and he's the best player on the team, it kind of got, all right, maybe I need to be putting a little more work in here. Maybe I need to be kind of as committed and dedicated and doing those little extra small things, that attention to detail, that commitment to a different standard of excellence, and a higher standard of excellence. And once everyone does that for one another, it can become infectious. And now you've got a team that believes in itself, right? It's, I wrote an article a number of months ago kind of recounting this whole situation with Boston Red Sox still the only team to ever come back from 3 down in a series in Major League Baseball. And they win the American League Championship against the Yankees. They lost game 3, like 19-3, I think it was the score. And then they go win 4 straight, 2 at Fenway and 2 at Yankee Stadium. And, it was a team that started to, when you put that much work and that much effort into spring training, 162 game season, all the playoffs, this is, most teams in that situation aren't going to roll over and just say, well, I guess we'll wait till next year. It's like, no. We have to win just the next game. And then we have to just win the next one. And then they're confronted with all this stuff about, hey, no one in Major League Baseball has ever done it. And they're like, well, why not us? Let's be the first then. Let's kind of do that. And when you get that kind of collective belief, magic happens. And if you look at that particular series, with one of the games, I think went 12, the other one went 14 innings. The Sox pulled it out in the 2 games in a row with what? David Ortiz basically carrying the team on his back for a lot of those games. It was extraordinary. And I think And sometimes, by the way, it's not always the superstar player that may be carrying the team on his back. I think if you look at the NBA finals in 81, I realize we're using a lot of sports metaphors here, but Cedric Maxwell, I think, was the most valuable player of Game 7 or however it went in that series. They played Houston. I think it was Game 6 or something. But yeah, it was Cedric Maxwell that was the MVP. So it just kind of depends. And it's, I think, really extraordinary. And I think something that should serve as a reminder to us as we're on a team that maybe it'll be someone else's role today to be that leader in the team, but maybe tomorrow I need to be the leader in the team because something touches on the specialty area that is unique to the gifts I can bring to the team or whatever it happens to be, or that I have an attitude or an experience or something that can inspire the team to believe that we are capable of more. And I think every one of us has a potential to play that role.
Yeah, for sure. So when you have taken the torch of leadership in your organization and you see what changes need to take place to get this culture, during that integration phase where you're kind of changing the face or the brand or the culture within the organization, how do you deal with the need for like short term, like in the short term, you still need to generate profits. You still need to have the business operations going, but you're transforming so many pieces simultaneously. How does that transition go best in organizations?
Yeah, well, let's say, let's face it. Oftentimes you need the financial resources to finance your ability to grow and be better. So you always have to pay attention to those things. The other thing too is that it's not about, it's like they say, well, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And I think you've got to look at how do we go about this in a way that gives us these short-term wins, that allows us to celebrate, that allows us to, show results in the near term while we know we are building toward the longer term. And I think that becomes essential. One of the stories that, I've told in one of the books was having my daughters and I climb a mountain in Colorado. They were young. They were 12 or 13 or something like that. And we've got this 12,800 foot peak and they want to climb it. And I talked to them about what would be necessary to do it. And they prepared for a few weeks and they did their thing. And they were physically able to do it, no question. But anyone who's ever done that knows the mental challenge of it, right? Because you get up in that mountain and you get above the tree line and you start looking at the peak. And then what you do is you climb for a while and you look at the peak again. You climb for a while more and you keep looking at that peak, right? It's this idea of keeping your eye on the prize, which can be incredibly bad advice, by the way. So finally, they realize it becomes debilitating because every time you look at that peak, it appears no closer than when you looked at it 20 minutes earlier. I mean, it's really like, man, like, are we ever getting there? This is just terrible. So they get to a point where they start telling me like, hey, the view looks pretty good from here. Or I talk to them about making sure that we've got to be mindful of weather. When you're on a mountain in the summertime, you don't want to be on a big rock in the middle of a thunderstorm. So, and it was this like little, puffy white cloud up there. And my daughter says, Dad, we got to be worried about that weather? I said, no, I think we're okay. So I can clearly tell they're like right at the end and they're looking at me and they're exhausted. And they said, we think we're done. This has been great. And I said, well, tell you what, why don't we climb for 10 more minutes? And then at the end of 10 minutes, if you guys are done, we're done. And they're like, all right, fine. They humored me basically. But I said, tell you what, here's where we are. There was this big bush that was right here. And so we climbed for our 10 minutes and 10 minutes to the second. They're like, all right, 10 minutes. We gave you 10 minutes. It's up. Look. And they look at the peak. They say, it's no closer than it was 10 minutes ago. I said, look behind you. And they looked at that bush and it was a dot on that landscape down the mountain. And they couldn't believe the progress they made. And because of it, they were like, wow, okay, well, we can keep doing this. We can do this for another 10 minutes and another 10 minutes. And as they did, they were celebrating the victories along the way, as opposed to being so fixated on this peak that never seemed to be getting any closer. And you find that, you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you will get there. But I think to deal both with the physical and emotional, drama, trauma, whatever you want to use for a word that we all kind of suffer through to do that, we need some mechanism. We need some ability to be able to celebrate along the way and feel good about what we're doing and mark those small wins. And I think once we do that, that can be hugely helpful to achieving any longer term goal.
So is that kind of like creating a
And-
space for gratitude, or for talking about the good news of the past week? Or is that mostly what that looks like?
There's no question. I think companies pretty much don't celebrate enough. They don't. If you look at the 5 exemplary practices of leadership by Kouzes and Posner, right? One of them is encouraging the heart. They do a self-assessment. They do a whole 360 assessment about how you score against each of those practice areas. And my recollection of it was that encouraging the heart is, for most people, where they score the lowest. They're really good at challenging the process. They're really good at inspiring a shared vision or enabling others to act. But they're not always really good about taking the time to publicly recognize how important it is to encourage people's hearts. And I think once leaders can tap into the power of that and the understanding around that, it just helps. It helps unify teams. It helps them be more successful. It helps with a lot of things. Another metaphor for this that was helpful is one of the things I was taught is if you're a runner and you're running long distance and all of a sudden it's one of those days where you're just not feeling up to it, and it's we'll say it's a 10-mile run. So at 8 miles, you're feeling like, all right, the only way I'm going to get through the last 2 miles here is to kind of walk and run and just get me through it and be done. So your choice of doing that is either you're going to run till you can't run anymore and then stop and walk for a while. And then all of a sudden you start running again and you run until you can't run anymore. And then you walk for a while, which what happens, right? Every time I stop, it's just a repeated defeat, essentially, right? So then you get at the end of the 10 miles, and even if you finished it, you're feeling crappy about it, and it certainly doesn't help your confidence the next day. However, what if you said, I am going to run to that stop sign or that tree, and when I get there, I'm going to declare victory, and then I'm going to walk for a little while, and as soon as I'm ready to kind of run again, I'm going to mark another spot, and I'm going to run to it, and I'm going to declare victory again. The difference mentally between those repeated defeats and those wins, one after another, to get you through those last 2 miles is night and day. So how we as leaders frame things for our team and kind of help them, through things like that, because we're not always having a great day every single day, So I think it's really important for leaders to be attuned to that, and for every team member to be attuned to it. And that's how we lift each other up, right?
How do you get attuned to it individually? Like, what do you have in place in your day to allow you to kind of put your oxygen mask on first, or like feed your own self in order to be able to be this kind of leader?
So usually for me, and I'm very lucky in that I have the flexibility to do this, being, what I do, but there are days where I could, so let's say I have an article I know I need to write, or something I need to finish, or something I need to do, and I'm just not feeling it, So I don't want to not do anything. So what I do is I seek out other things that are productive yet represent outlets for me that give me energy, right? It could be connecting with people on some things that I want to do that day. It could be going on Canva, for example, and creating infographics or doing things that just give me some fun, thing that gives me a little energy, that gives me a little spark, so that by the time I've got to do this other thing that I've been loath to do, I'm in a better headspace to be able to do that, and recognize that and recognizing, by the way, too, from a productivity standpoint, if I try to force myself to do something when I'm not in the headspace to do it, it won't be as good, and it will take me twice as long. If I take that time and do other things with that time that are productive, by the time I get to the activity and I'm ready for that activity, I will do it twice as fast, and it will be twice as good. So that's a little bit of how I kind of mentally do that juggle, but we all do. And it's not hard to tap into. You either feel like it or you don't, it's just, there's just days where you wake up. And by the way, again, as I kind of opened the show here, I feel amazingly great about what I get to do every day. And I'm energized by it all the time. However, there are different activities and different requirements around fulfilling that purpose. And so I have to just kind of manage my time and manage my energy around trying to be really productive when the time is right.
Right. What is like your bigger vision for where all this is going? Like, do you ultimately want to be retired, or is that not like a concept that's interesting to you? Where does this, where does this go? Like,
So the
what is
traditional
your,
notion of retirement, like this idea of like, you just hang it up and you go fishing or play golf or something like that and don't do anything else, is not really what I'm into doing, especially where I found something that I enjoy so much. And so when I think about this, and again, getting back to, I think, the focus of your show, which is about purpose, it's really not about me at all. My focus is, how can I bring what I have come to understand to be so incredibly effective and put it in the hands of more people, not only here in the US, but around the world. Very lucky. I'm working, to the next 3 weeks, next 2 to 3 weeks, Peernovation will be released in China, for example. Through Win Mastermind, I've gotten a lot of traction, in Europe, and we're going to be looking. I led a group meeting in Australia a couple of months ago. There's things that are happening, all over the world in all kinds of sectors that, give me hope that in a world that, on one hand, people regard as being incredibly divisive, at least politically, I think we also have to recognize that the pandemic also helped us tap into our shared humanity quite a bit as well. And that we've gotten to recognize some of the shared challenges we have. And we've gotten to know one another, not just as fellow employees, but as fellow human beings. And that's done a lot to make us more understanding, more empathetic, more cooperative, and as a result, more collaborative, which is why productivity is up, for a lot of organizations as a result of that. It's kind of ironic that, to bring our employees closer together, we had to pull them out of the office. But I think in many respects, that played out in a lot of different organizations. And so for me, that purpose of being able to get people to think in terms of not scarcity, but abundance, and recognizing that the power of we does begin with me, and that we are capable of more than we could possibly imagine if we just, believe in one another and stay committed to our purpose. I think the potential is enormous.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I want to just talk more about kind of general wisdom as we like head out of the kind of the last part of the show.
General wisdom. All right, we'll see what we can do.
Wisdom related to purpose. I guess I have a list of questions I'm scanning right now that I always like to ask. What if you're talking to someone kind of, I think a lot of my audience is similar age to me. They're in their 20s. They have it seems like they have a knowingness that they have an individual purpose. They're doing things to fulfill it. They don't know how that manifests in their life in different ways. What's the best advice that you would give someone in their 20s around how to kind of like seek, find, fulfill their purpose?
That's a great question. So first of all, and it's very funny you mentioned this. It's actually part of an article that I just literally put into CEOWORLD today. And it's basically, looking at the back half, and it's called Don't Play Small Ball. And, it's this idea of, and Laura Goodrich actually came up with this in a book she wrote a while back called Seeing Red Cars. And she said, when you ask most people what they want, most people will answer the question, well, what I don't want is such and such. They won't they want to say what they want. Robert Fritz, who is a management consultant, would explain this as this idea that people tend to feel one of two things, and sometimes both. They feel powerless or they feel unworthy. And so when it comes to listeners to this podcast who really, want to fulfill a purpose in life, for whatever that is, you are not powerless and you are not unworthy. So the moment you can shed those two things and speak out loud about what it is you want for yourself in this world, and then you can enlist the support of others to make that possible, that's a really great first step. I also think that life is not, it's not like we set up, or here's our strategic plan for life, with like, here's what the grand picture is, and we're just going to, here's our way we're going to go about that. I think it's a rather iterative process. It's a journey where we're constantly exploring and discovering and recognizing that, I can make a choice today, and that doesn't mean it's a life forever choice. It's just what I'm doing right now, and that's okay, yeah, I think that constantly being open, constantly looking and exploring, because sometimes it can take us a while to find our purpose. Some people don't find it for a very long time. When I think about the purpose that I have right now, it wasn't on my radar 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but it's central to what I'm doing at the moment. And it's because I remained open to learning and growing, and all of a sudden discovering something that connected with me so viscerally that it's like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so I think be patient. That's another thing. Advice to anyone in their 20s, being patient is okay. You don't have to find out tomorrow what your purpose in life is. And you're going to find that things will change over time, and that's okay too.
Right. What's something important that you've had to kind of unlearn or undo to really find alignment with your sense of purpose?
I would say when I was in graduate school and I had to be part of a learning team, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a model learning team member. I had to learn how to do that. I had to learn how to work and play well with others in that environment. And I had a lot of really good, fellow students who were patient and were helpful in helping me get there. But those were invaluable lessons that I think that, I've been able to take with me going forward. So yeah, I had to unlearn some of that.
Right. Do you have a mentor or someone that that really impacted your journey, and how do you suggest people go about finding mentors that can uplift their sense of purpose?
Yeah, I've had a lot of mentors. And what's interesting is, we chatted earlier about the second book, What Anyone Can Do. That was actually written because I did a podcast in 2017 called The Year of the Peer. And it was named that because this guy, Randy Cantrell, a great guy who I continue to work with on our podcast, he's the co-host of the podcast Peernovation today, was trying to get me into trying to do podcasting. And I thought, well, at least I want to give myself an exit strategy, right? So we're just going to do the Year of the Peer. And at the end of the year, we can just kind of figure out where we do from there, but at least it can be kind of done and buttoned up, right? But the point of the Year of the Peer was we interviewed 50 really successful people. And we asked them, every one of them, among other things, but we asked them the question, hey, did you get where you are today all by yourself? And they all laughed at the idea of that. This is ridiculous, right? And again, it wasn't just one mentor, two mentors, it was countless people that they came across in their life, sometimes longer term relationships, sometimes short, but who all contributed to it. And even though they will never be able to pay those people back, what they try to do, and I think what we all try to do, is how do we pay it forward? How do we help other people that? So I would say, don't be afraid to ask. When we ask for help, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a true act of resourcefulness. So if you're in your 20s and you're looking to learn about certain areas or try certain things or whatever it may be that you're trying to learn, you'd be amazed at if you just ask for help. A lot of people would be very excited to give it to you because they remember back when they were that age and they were asking the help of others and somebody stepped up and did that for them. So I think that's really helpful.
Right, exactly. Cool. Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's really wonderful how you shared that no one gets where they are themselves and they have lots of mentors, and you don't need to feel like you're in this direct debt to someone. Like you're probably never going to be able to pay back the mentor what they gave to you, but you can pass it forward and be someone else's mentor.
Absolutely.
It's a big part of leadership. All right. Well, yeah, before we conclude, I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of share how people can get, in touch with your work more. What is your deepest intention for being on this podcast interview, and how can our audience help you, and how can what you do serve our audience? What's the next steps that people can take?
Yeah, I think it's been a great opportunity, and I really appreciate it, Tanner, the opportunity to kind of extend the reach of the message about the importance of surrounding ourselves with really great people, whether that's informally among our friends and colleagues and family members and all, or to be part of a peer group and recognize that as a contributing member of a team that you really matter. I do a lot of work with peer groups, helping them really squeeze the most value possible out of their peer group experience. And I also work with teams to basically take what peer advisory groups do so brilliantly and help them apply them to teams in their organization. So oftentimes we'll work with cross-functional work teams in the C-suite, and then work with organizational teams inside the company. And it's a lot of fun. But people can connect with me on LinkedIn, certainly. They can go to leobottary.com. leobottary.com. You can also go to peernovation.co. Takes you to the same spot, and you can learn a lot about my work. There's, like hundreds of articles and podcasts and everything. It's a pretty content-rich site, and it's all there for you for free to use in whatever way you like. But if I can be ever be helpful to you or your organization, you should feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah. And we're here to help you in any ways possible too. If you want to connect with certain folks, I interview people of purpose, every month. And it's a really beautiful role, as you understand, to be in the podcast seat and kind of see where people really shine and how people can connect together. So if there's something you want to do with us or any of our guests, feel free to reach out as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, as we sign off, is there any kind of a thing that we didn't talk about that you want to share? Any final thought to kind of leave the audience with?
No, I think that, again, there's a woman who I love her work. Her name is Angela Myers, and she does a lot of work with kids. And it's a not-for-profit called Choose to Matter. And it's this idea that whether we're kids, whether we're, in our 20s, whether we're the CEO or whatever, it's to really understand and recognize how much I matter, and to kind of own your genius, recognize what your special gifts are, try to build on those gifts, and try to make sure that you're using those gifts to make a difference in the world. And I think if you can, do that, I think the world's going to be a better place.
I love it. I can't agree more. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Leo. It's been wonderful to kind of, understand your message at a deeper level and put some tangible ideas to it. I'm extremely excited to see how this takes shape in our company now that I have this knowledge and this wisdom, and you in my network now. And then I'm excited for all the people that you're going to connect with, whether it's through people of purpose or out there in the world, through people that find you. I think that you can definitely have an impact in organizations, and yeah, you really grasp something that's essential to what it takes to be a good leader and to form powerful teams. I thank you for sharing that today.
Hey, well, thank you for having me on the show. It was terrific, Tanner. Thank you.
Thank you.